Martin Luther, His Life and the 95 Theses. The story of Martin Luther is that of a man who challenged the most powerful church of his time and ended up changing the history of Europe forever. Luther did not seek to become a revolutionary, but his thirst for truth and justice led him to confront the Vatican and initiate what we now know as the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther was born on November 10, 1483, in Eisleben, a small town in the Holy Roman Empire, in what is now Germany. The son of a humble but hard-working family, his father, Hans Luther, was a miner who dreamed of his son becoming a prestigious lawyer. From a young age, Martin showed great intelligence and discipline, which allowed him to enter the University of Erfurt at the age of 17. However, Luther's life changed drastically in 1505. One day, while traveling home, a thunderstorm surprised him on the road. A lightning bolt struck near him, throwing him to the ground. Terrified, he cried out to Saint Anne, the patron saint of miners, promising that if he survived, he would become a monk. He survived, and true to his word, he abandoned his law studies and entered the Augustinian monastery. In the monastery, Luther devoted himself to the study of the Bible and theology. However, despite his devotion, he could not find peace. He felt overwhelmed by the weight of sin and constantly doubted his salvation. In search of answers, in 1510, he traveled to Rome, the heart of the Catholic Church. What he saw there deeply shocked him: corruption, excessive luxury, and a clergy more interested in power and money than in faith. This journey left an indelible mark on Luther. He returned to Germany with more questions than answers, but his true clash with the church would occur a few years later when a Dominican friar named Johann Tetzel began selling indulgences in his region. Tetzel claimed that those who bought these documents would have their sins forgiven and their salvation guaranteed. For Luther, this was an offense to true Christian faith. That was when he decided to act. Outraged by the sale of indulgences, Luther made a decision that would change history. On October 31, 1517, he nailed a document with 95 theses to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg, denouncing the abuses of the church. These theses were not an act of open rebellion but a call for academic debate. Luther hoped that his arguments would be discussed by the theologians of his time, but the impact of his action was far greater than he had imagined. Thanks to the invention of the printing press, the 95 Theses spread quickly throughout Germany and then across Europe. In them, Luther criticized the corruption of the church, rejected the sale of indulgences, and asserted that salvation was not obtained through works or money but through faith in God. This idea struck directly at the church's power, which based much of its authority on controlling the salvation of souls. The Vatican's reaction was swift. Pope Leo X, enraged by Luther's challenge, accused him of heresy and demanded that he recant. But Luther, convinced that he was defending the truth, refused. The dispute escalated and reached its most critical point in 1521 when he was summoned to the Diet of Worms, an imperial assembly where he had to answer to Emperor Charles V. There, Luther stood firm in his convictions. When ordered to retract, he uttered one of his most famous phrases, "Here I stand. I can do no other. May God help me." With these words, he sealed his break with the Catholic Church. As a result, he was declared a heretic and outlaw, meaning that anyone could kill him without legal consequences. However, Luther had powerful allies. Frederick III of Saxony, a prince sympathetic to his ideas, organized a plan to protect him. He arranged for Luther's staged capture and took him to Wartburg Castle, where he remained in hiding for nearly a year. During that time, Luther took a revolutionary step. He translated the Bible into German, allowing ordinary people to read it without needing a priest as an intermediary. The Protestant Reformation was now unstoppable. From his refuge in Wartburg Castle, Luther continued his reformist work. The translation of the Bible into German was a decisive step, as it allowed anyone with access to literacy to understand God's word for themselves, without relying on the church's interpretation. This boosted literacy and strengthened the reformist movement in Germany and other parts of Europe. Meanwhile, in Wittenberg, Luther's ideas spread rapidly. His followers began implementing Reformed teachings. They abolished the Latin Mass, allowed priests to marry, and rejected the Pope's authority. However, the movement was not without conflict. In 1524, the German Peasants' War broke out, fueled in part by a radical interpretation of Luther's principles. Many peasants, oppressed by feudal lords, believed that the Reformation justified a struggle for social justice. But Luther, fearing chaos and anarchy, condemned the rebellion and supported the princes in suppressing it. This cost him the support of more radical sectors but ensured the protection of rulers sympathetic to his cause. As the years passed, the Reformation became more established. In 1530, the Augsburg Confession, written by Philip Melanchthon, became the doctrinal foundation of Lutheranism. By then, many cities and states of the Holy Roman Empire had adopted the new faith, directly challenging the authority of Emperor Charles V and the Pope. Personally, Luther also broke away from the traditional Catholic Church model. In 1525, he renounced his vow of celibacy and married Katharina von Bora, a former nun who, like him, had abandoned religious life. Their marriage, considered scandalous at the time, became a symbol of the new religious order Luther promoted, a faith closer to daily life, without clerical impositions or unmovable hierarchies. Over the years, Luther continued writing and preaching, though he also faced criticism and internal conflicts within the reformist movement itself. Despite this, his influence kept growing, laying the foundation for what we now know as Protestantism. As Lutheranism spread, tensions with the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire increased. Emperor Charles V, a devout Catholic, tried to halt the Reformation's advance, but political reality worked against him. Many German princes saw Luther's movement as an opportunity to reduce the Pope's and the Emperor's power. Thus, the Schmalkaldic League was born, a coalition of Protestant princes willing to defend their faith, even by force. Luther, however, never wanted a religious war. His original intention was to reform the Church from within, but over time, he realized that the split was inevitable. While political conflicts grew, he continued writing and spreading his ideas. He produced numerous sermons, hymns, and theological treatises, consolidating Lutheran doctrine. In his later years, Luther became more radical, attacking Catholics, other reformers, and even Jews in controversial writings. Luther died on February 18, 1546, in his hometown of Eisleben. His last words reflected his unwavering faith: "We are beggars." This is true. His legacy reshaped history forever. The impact of Martin Luther transcended his time and marked the beginning of a new era in European history. His challenge to the Catholic Church not only transformed Christianity but also influenced politics, education, and Western culture. One of the greatest legacies of the Reformation was the idea of freedom of conscience. Before Luther, the Church had a monopoly on the interpretation of the Bible and access to salvation. With the translation of the Scriptures into vernacular languages and the teaching that every believer could have a direct relationship with God, the Church's absolute control over people's spiritual lives was broken. This change had profound consequences. In education, Luther promoted literacy so that everyone could read the Bible for themselves. In many Protestant territories, schools accessible to the people were established, contributing to the expansion of knowledge and education across Europe. In the political sphere, the Reformation weakened the power of the Catholic Church and strengthened the autonomy of states. The break with Rome led to the consolidation of national churches, such as the Church of England and various branches of Protestantism in Germany, Switzerland, and Scandinavia. This process also influenced the development of the concept of national sovereignty, laying the foundations for the future secularism of modern states. However, the Reformation also brought conflicts. Religious wars shook Europe for over a century. From the 30 Years' War in the 17th century to the clashes between Catholics and Protestants in France and England, religious disputes led to violent confrontations that reshaped the political map of the continent. Despite these divisions, Luther's influence continued to grow. His emphasis on individual faith and a personal relationship with God inspired later movements within Christianity, such as Pietism, Methodism, and Evangelicalism. Even beyond religion, his ideas about individual autonomy influenced the philosophical and political thought of the Enlightenment. Today, Luther remains a complex and debated figure. For many, he is a hero of faith, a reformer who challenged corruption and restored Christianity to its roots. For others, his radical positions and intolerance towards certain groups tarnish his legacy. What is undeniable is that Martin Luther changed the course of history. His courage in challenging the most powerful institution of his time opened a new chapter in the history of Christianity in the world. His 95 Theses were not just an academic document but the spark that ignited a revolution that still resonates today. Did you know that one man defied the most powerful institution of his time and changed history forever? Leave a comment. Was Luther a hero or a dangerous rebel? Share this story with someone who likes critical thinking. Subscribe, like us and turn on the little bell for more stories that change the world.